Hey there, friends. So yesterday, my daughter came home from college, and the moment she walked through the door, I could see there was a problem. She had that, that look people get sometimes when you can see they've got a headache, where their eyes are too big and their skin is like tight and, everything's tensed and clenched. She was like that. And it turned out that she had lost her phone and a bus pass that morning. And understandably, for a teenage girl, losing your phone, a bit stressful. But actually, it's probably not for the reason you think, and I'll come back to Abby in a second. But because the other thing that happened yesterday was that Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, went to Luxembourg. He went to Europe. And you probably know that in the UK, we're 3 years into this national spasm of Brexit, where we've got half the country wants to do one thing and half the country wants to do the other. And it's whether or not we leave the European Union. We voted to leave, but then it's all delayed and it's all a big mess, a massive, massive mess. In fact, as I record this, there is a High Court proceeding going on in London to decide whether or not the Prime Minister broke the law when he shut Parliament last week. Anyway, the point is, for the last 3 years, if you live in the UK, you will have been telling yourself a story about Brexit, right? And it will probably be either it's a disaster to stay or it's a disaster to go. Those are the two stories, and they're competing, and we've had more or less 50-50. Depending on who you speak to and which poll you read. But yesterday, Johnson went to Luxembourg, and they were due. He was going to see Xavier Bettel, I think. I don't know whether he's the Prime Minister or the President, but the guy in charge. And they were due to do this press conference, and it turned out the press conference was outside, and it was not very far from this big crowd of baying, loud protesters. Perhaps understandably, Johnson asked whether they could move the venue and do it inside, and perhaps equally understandably, the Mr. Bettel said no, we'll do it outside, and you can be there or not be there. And that's what happened. Boris Johnson was effectively sort of empty chaired at the press conference because he didn't want to do it. And this immediately became a big story in the UK. And of course, depending on the story you've been telling yourself about Brexit, you can spin it in two ways. On the one hand, you can say, well, this is exactly why we need to leave the EU. They show us no respect. They're not trying to help. They're actually making it harder at this difficult time. So you can say that. On the other hand, you can say, well, Boris Johnson gets exactly what he deserves. He led this ridiculous leave campaign. He's become Prime Minister off the back of this populist narrative, and he is getting what he deserves. Now he can't even stand in front of the cameras. You can tell those two stories interchangeably, and depending on what you think about Brexit, you will definitely think one thing or the other, right? Let's go back to Abby. The reason Abby was stressed wasn't really because of the phone, and it wasn't really because of the bus pass. It was because for a good few years now, of our two kids, Abby has been able to tell herself the story that she is the responsible, sensible, careful one. And what happened yesterday was that she lost her phone and her bus pass. And there is no way you can spin. There's no way you can spin that. And what is so obvious when you think about these things is that we are our stories. Whether it's you or me or my clients or your clients, your customers, they are their stories. So when I occasionally get someone saying, well, our stories, they're that important for business, I think about stuff like this, and I think about how important it is that when we're creating our own stories, our own business myths and leader legends or whatever it is, that we tap into the kind of things that our audience believes. Yeah, and we appreciate that stories are us in a very powerful, very deep kind of way. And that was what Abby was so stressed about yesterday, was that what had happened violated something deep inside her, a story she tells herself that is part of her identity. And when we mess around with stories, we mess around with identity, right? And we mess around with something sort of deep. And that's why it's so important to learn how to tell good, powerful stories, because you're going up against serious forces when you tell a story. Anyway, that's my thought for today. Thanks for watching. See you in another video.